You're listening to Inside Lebo, a podcast giving you an inside look at Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, produced by Mount Lebanon's Public Information Office.
On any given day in Mount Lebanon, you might pass through Bird Park or Twin Hills without realizing that the landscape around you is a result of decades of quiet, determined work. Look a little closer and you'll see it. The careful balance of native trees, the absence of invasive overgrowth, and the early stages of restoration that'll shape these woods for generations. Much of that transformation can be traced back to one person, Ron Block. Hi, I'm Rachel Windsor, Mount Lebanon's Assistant Public Information Officer and the Senior Editor of Mount Lebanon Magazine.
And I'm Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans. Each year, the Mount Lebanon Civic Engagement Board recognizes a resident whose volunteer service has made a meaningful and lasting difference in our community. The Community Service Award honors individuals who contribute significantly through volunteer work, support the well-being of others, demonstrate strong ethical values, and serve as an inspiration to those around them. In today's episode, brought to you by Truver's Jewelry, we're joined by this year's recipient, Ron Block, someone whose work reflects all of those qualities.
So Ron, thank you for being here and congratulations on receiving the award. Can you tell us how you first became involved in working in Mount Lebanon's parks?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to the Civic Engagement Board and the municipality for this award. My children went to Markham Elementary, and as you know, Markham is right across the street from Bird Park. So as I would go up to Markham, started noticing the invasive species that were along Beadling Road there. At the time, there was a lot of knotweed in a couple of different places, a lot of bittersweet that was climbing up to trees. And so I was working on the gardens in landscape. There was a group of parents that were working on that at Markham. And some of the other ones and I started talking and noticing that. And so we started getting together and working on the invasives in Bird Park. Deb Larson, Luann Bailey, and then some of the people from the Conservancy, Tom Shvetchuk, and Pam Barrett at the time. We'd get together once a month and start working in the parks there. So,
cool. So, what drew you to kind of work in parks in natural areas and with invasive species initially?
Initially, I was probably like a lot of people. I didn't really pay that much attention. If it was green, I just thought that was good. And actually, I was in Germany one time, and I was at an art museum. And I went to have lunch, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself, walking around, and I could identify paintings from across the room and thinking, oh, I'm so educated. And then I sat down at the cafe to have lunch, and they were doing a renovation at the museum there. And there was big piles of dirt outside the window. And I looked, and all these plants were growing, and the weeds were growing, basically. And I thought, this looks exactly like my yard. I thought that was kind of interesting, that the plants were the same as they were in Pennsylvania. And then I was ashamed because I couldn't identify more than a dandelion. And so all of a sudden, my thought of that I was this highly educated person came crashing down, and I realized there was a lot that I didn't know. So I kind of got interested in learning about plants and trees and the different plants that the settlers brought with them, into the Pennsylvania area and throughout North America, of course, and how those plants traveled from Europe into America for medication or with, animals or whatever, and then how some of those became problematic plants. And it's just kind of grown from there. So
that's interesting. And for listeners that might not be familiar, what does restoring a native woodland actually involve?
Yeah, so it's hard to know, actually, because our woodlands are so degraded at this point. What we see everywhere is not how it should look, but we're so used to that's just we think that's what it is like. But the woods that we see driving along the parkway or highways or anywhere, especially this time of year, you can really notice it. There's a layer of green shrubbery. The trees haven't leafed out yet, but you'll see that layer of green shrubbery about 12 to 15 feet tall. And that is all invasive shrubs. Honeysuckle and privet and multiflora rose and barberry. And the problem with those plants is that they are preventing the native plants from growing. Okay, they create a layer of dense shade. So what you'll notice underneath them is bare ground, and nothing can penetrate that canopy. And so long term, the problem is our woods will not regenerate. Once the old trees die, there won't be young trees coming up through that because they can't get through that canopy. So restoring the woodland is to get that layer of invasive plants out of the way and then making room for the native plants to come in and grow.
So in your nomination notes, it mentioned that you contribute about 400 hours a year to improving our parks here in Mount Lebanon. So that's like the equivalent of a part-time job. How do you have time for all that?
You can call it a job or a hobby or an obsession, maybe. I just, I realized that once a month wasn't going to make a dent in what needed to be done. And so I just started going out and working out there on my own in the parks. And initially it was funny. I was actually nervous going out there and working because I was like, am I allowed to do this? Mm-hmm. You know, there wasn't anyone said I couldn't do it, but no one really officially said I could do it. And actually the police were called on me a couple times out there. People walking would notice a man in the woods with a machete and go, oh my gosh, call the police. So, but that hasn't happened in quite a few years. I think people now are used to seeing people out there working in the woods. And, the sight of somebody out there, yeah, is pretty normal. I can't really take a walk anymore without seeing some area that needs some work. So I kind of will take a walk, and then next thing I know, it's 4 hours later. I'm pulling weeds or cutting something down. So maybe obsession's a better job, but I enjoy it. It's fun, and I enjoy seeing the progress that we've been making now over the 20 years.
So just as a quick follow-up, for folks who may have, either a small patch of woods or a wooded area in their backyards behind their house, who might, be pulling weeds, seeing invasive species, you're out in the parks doing this. So what's the best way to kind of pull the weeds out, but make sure they don't repopulate or regrow once you pull them out? Yeah,
a lot of the problem plants will grow if any part of the stem touches the ground or if the roots touch the ground. You can't just pull it out and set it back down because it'll just re-root back into the ground. So you have to pull it up, and then that's why if you walk the woods, you'll see little piles of plants on top of a log or something. Pull them out, put them up on a log so that those roots will dry out and they won't re-root.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. But yeah, you got to get the root out because if you just chop the top off, it'll just come back from the roots. So, yeah.
Yeah, and similarly, when people walk through our parks, they might not realize the level of planning and effort behind what they're seeing. So what are some of the other visible changes that come from the sort of restoration work that you do?
Hopefully people who have walked the parks regularly over years have seen the difference. The trails are in much better shape than they used to be. There's a lot more diversity in species now. It's more open. That's a big thing probably that would people notice. The plants used to really encroach on the trails, and they still do in some places where we haven't gotten to. The backside of Robb Hollow really can show what that is like. They'll just keep growing. They won't stop. So you have to kind of beat them back a little bit. But in areas where we've done a pretty much full restoration, then you see that ground plane, and it's a lot more pleasant to walk through. So.
Great. So before we take a quick break and move on to the second half of the show, just to ask, when you look at the parks today compared to when you started, what stands out to you the most?
One thing, I think there's a lot more users in the park now. It's a lot more inviting environment. So I think that draws people out, and that's a rewarding part of it. There's a lot more light coming through. It's not so dark and dreary in there, not so scary. I know people have told me they feel safer walking in the park now because it doesn't feel like there's somebody creepy could be around the corner, unless it's me. But yeah, it's a more inviting environment. They'll see a lot more diversity in species, and you see lots of young things growing, young trees and young flowers, and so.
Great.
Sure. So we're going to take a quick break with a word from our sponsor, Trouvers Jewelry, and in part 2, we'll talk more about how Ron plans these projects, works with volunteers and the Department of Public Works, and then turns that long-term vision into reality.
Looking for that perfect piece of jewelry? At Trouvers Jewelry, you're not just a customer, you're part of the family. Locally owned by Mount Lebanon residents Rob and Kay Trouver, Trouvers has specialized in exquisite craftsmanship and custom jewelry design for over 30 years. Rob is an expert goldsmith, ensuring your jewelry is created with the utmost skill and care. Whether you're looking for something timeless or one of a kind, Trouvers delivers it all. Visit us at the corner of West Liberty and Piermont Avenue, or check us out online at trouvers.com. At Trouvers, it's personal.
Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Ron Block, this year's Mount Lebanon Community Service Award winner. In part one, we talked about your long-term commitment and visible impact of your work. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into how these projects actually come together. So can you walk us through your planning process?
My planning process is actually to take a walk. So walking through the planning process is walking through the parks. As I walk through different times of year, different times of weather, and then I can see areas that need attention. Whether it's during a rainy period, you can see where the water's running down a trail and the trail needs some attention. Or you can, in the winter time, you can see holes in the canopy where there aren't any large trees growing. In December, you can see where vine honeysuckle is still green. It doesn't go brown in the winter. So, oh, there's a problem. Or like in fall, you'll see burning bush turning bright red in the parks. During the summertime, it just blends in with everything else. But that time of year, November, you're like, oh, there's a problem spot. And so kind of make a mental map of those problem areas and then kind of figure out how to go after them. So.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're really evaluating everything on a year-round basis, and before you even do any work, you kind of have a sense for where the areas are you want to attack.
Yeah, exactly. And then try to figure out how those areas can be addressed. Is it something that Public Works needs to address? Is it something we can do as a scout project? Is it something we can turn into a larger conservancy project? Or is it something that I can just do myself, in a short, kind of a little triage in the woods there?
So speaking of collaboration, can you tell us a little bit more about how you work together with our Department of Public Works?
Yeah, Public Works is awesome, as you know. They're really receptive, and we've got a good relationship working with them over the years. And so we're kind of the eyes and ears for them in the parks. If there's a problem area, we'll let them know about that. If there's a problem spot that there's a tree down across a trail or something, that we'll let them know and they'll come and take care of that. They'll give us our supplies when we need gravel or if we need lumber. We need fencing to protect the trees, and they'll get that all delivered to us. A good example is we did a repairing area below Bird Park a few years ago. And that area, if you remember when emerald ash borer came through, it killed a lot of the trees, almost all the ash trees in town. And there was an area just below the soccer field that had about 24 ash trees. So we decided we were going to try to rehabilitate that area. But the problem was we had all these mature trees fully standing and dead. And so that was a hazardous area. So we didn't really want to encourage people to come into that area by making the trails better, and we didn't want to have our volunteers working in that area. So we worked with Public Works, and they came in and they dropped all those trees and cut them up and, made it a safer environment for everybody.
Great. So once an area is cleared out, the next step is kind of rebuilding that area. Can you tell us a bit about the planting process?
Yeah, there's two processes really with planting. We have a kind of a planned process and more of an unplanned process. The planned process, we put a schedule together, the Conservancy, of our yearly projects and programs, and then we usually have one big planting in the spring and then another big planting in the fall. And so those usually happen. We usually have a clearing in March and then a planting in April, and then we have a clearing in September and another planting in October. So those are the planned bigger projects that we have. Then throughout the year, there'll be some more unplanned projects, like Elaine Kramer is great at finding grants and opportunities. And so she'll say, hey, 10 Million Trees is offering trees. Let's grab some. So we'll get 40 or 50 trees from them. And then we have to find a place for them. So the planned ones, we kind of have places in mind, and we'll figure out exactly what plants we want there. The unplanned ones, we'll get some trees from somewhere and then have to try to find a spot for them in the park. Thankfully, our parks are very diverse in the kind of areas that they have, so we can usually find a spot that works for every kind of plant that we can find. So,
and I imagine you're personally involved in the whole planting process, right?
Yes, yeah. I'll usually figure out what needs to go where, and then we'll go get the trees from Tree Pittsburgh, if you're familiar with Tree Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Yeah, they're amazing. And so we'll order from them, and then I'll go down and pick up the trees and bring them back for the planting. So.
Great.
Cool. So what keeps you motivated to continue doing this work year after year?
After this much time, we've had some success, and it's nice to see that continue. I kind of want to see if it's possible, right? I want to see if it's possible to restore woodland. I'm not sure if it is to restore degraded woodland, but we're going to make an attempt to do that. We have a great group of volunteers with the Conservancy, a great organization. So it's fun and it's rewarding that way. And this time of year, it's nice, any time of year really, but to go out there and to see bluebells blooming or golden ragwort or serviceberry trees, and to know that those weren't even there 5 years ago. You know, it's rewarding to see that, and it makes it worth the effort to keep continuing. So,
Absolutely. So if residents want to get involved in invasive removal, how can they go about that?
We are out there at least once a month working on it. Another thing they can do is get rid of the invasives that are in their own yard, because that's where a lot of these plants are coming from. It's all plants that were brought to America as ornamental plants for the most part, and they just escaped yards and are now just wreaking havoc in the woods. So people can get rid of the privet and the honeysuckle and the barberry and the burning bush in their yards, and that would help a lot, because that's where things are coming from. Don't dump things in the parks, because the seeds end up in the parks, and then we just have to battle them there. Take care of the thing, and then they can reach out anytime. We're out there all the time working on just join the Conservancy, check our website, and come help.
Cool. So just one final question.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned about a bunch of different types of plant species throughout our discussion here, and that you kind of went through an education process yourself of learning about what different plants looked like, all that. So what would be your advice for people who don't know a whole lot about the difference between what's a native plant versus an invasive plant, and how to go about just learning that information?
There's so much information out there now, and it's really interesting, like Doug Tallamy's books, if you're familiar with him, he explains in very good detail. They're really interesting books about how these native plants are needed for our wildlife. So a lot of native insects and bugs are specialists, right? They only feed on, like the spicebush swallowtail has to have spicebush or sassafras to lay its eggs and to eat and to live. If we don't have spicebush plants, we're not going to have spicebush swallowtails. And so his books explain that relationship. The birds, they eat the grubs, they eat the caterpillars, they eat the worms, but those caterpillars and worms and grubs aren't going to be there if they don't have native plants to feed on. So those there's different videos you can watch, or those books from Doug Tallamy are very interesting, and it's a great way to learn and start to get educated. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and for all your dedication, planning, and willingness to share your knowledge and clearly reflect all those values that go into the Community Service Award. And the long-term impact that connects back to the purpose of the award is definitely going to be seen not just now in our parks, but for generations to come. So we're really happy to be able to recognize individuals who make such a meaningful impact and difference in our community like you have done. So thank you very much for all of your work. And once again, thanks for everything you've done over the last 20 years. You mentioned the Nature Conservancy's website. That's lebonature.org. If people are interested in learning more information about the Mount Lebanon Nature Conservancy, or would like to get out and help Ron with the volunteer work that's happening to keep our parks beautiful.
And that's it for this edition of Inside Lebo, sponsored by Trouvers Jewelry, produced by Marcia Morgenstern, with music by Drew Mignot and graphics by Amy Robinson. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes, and we'll see you next time with more from Mount Lebanon.
Thanks for listening to Inside Lebo, produced by Mount Lebanon's Public Information Office. Learn more about all things Lebo at mountlebanon.org, or by following our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.